I want to talk about something which is the nature of the varying win rates and play rates of decks, as well as the nature of what it means to be oppressive as a deck. So everyone is saying that Go Hard is a deck that is kind of like trash now, like it got a lot worse. And there's a good chance that's true. There's a very good chance that's true, I guess. Like, we can't really rule anything out. But I personally think that it's very much being overstated. Like, I don't think Go Hard is gone at all. And I should explain exactly like why I think that. I made a tweet about this. This is kind of a hot take, which is I said, no idea why some people are saying Go Hard got gutted. Dex win rate might drop like 2% max at Plat and lower. It'll stay the same or be higher at Diamond Plus. And it's important to understand exactly what this means. Go Hard is a very oppressive deck. And oppressive decks never have high win rates in terms of the fields. I think a lot of people just use the word oppressive to mean, I don't think it means anything anymore. People use that word to mean unfun. People use that word to mean powerful. And those are all three completely different things. Because I was reading this Reddit post. You know, I mean, this post is basically saying there will never be a meta where a particular deck isn't hated by the community. You know, there will always be something people hate. And it's a fine post, I guess. There's definitely a lot of people that think that certain metas are ruined, and it is generally speaking true that, like, I mean, it's important to understand that this is a pattern. I do think that posts like this is a very, very common post. Posts like this usually, to me, are sort of missing the point. The thing that baffles me is that Go Hard seemed to be about 15% of decks, according to meta reports. If the strongest deck is only 15%, I consider it to be a healthy meta. What's not to like when the most impressive deck is only 1/6 of the games? There's only one thing wrong with this comment. Like, this comment is correct, except for one thing, which is this word right here, oppressive. Oppressive decks literally never have the highest win rates. Never. And there's a reason for that. Oppressive does not mean powerful. They're not dissimilar turns. To be able to be oppressive, you do need a certain power level, but they're very, very, very different things. So what oppressive means is an archetype of deck that has such a high win rate against some other things while still being in and of itself a decent thing, even not against that thing. So let me define this with like better words, okay? So what oppressive means: a deck that holds back a subset of otherwise playable strategies while not being dependent on countering those strategies. So it's a deck that has a very high win rate against some subset of decks. In this case, let's say the two people are talking about the most are like Draven Jinx and Ashe Noxus, I guess. And it's a really hard counter to those strategies, but Go Hard is independent of that counter, a fine strategy. And that this is what it means to be oppressive, because this second part means Go Hard will see play on ladder, and this first part means that the presence of Go Hard will stop a lot of decks from making sense. That's what oppressive means. The thing to understand about this definition is by its very definition, it has an incredibly hard time being like the highest win rate deck in the game. Oppressive decks that are truly oppressive, usually are like low tier 1. Low tier 1 is a very, very common place to find an oppressive deck, which is like, yeah, it's got a good win rate. Go Hard TF's win rate in the last couple of weeks is very arguably tier 2. And the thing to understand about that is why that happens, which is kind of intuitive. When you have a deck that, you know, forces people to play outside of things that it counters, it means that because nobody can play the things that it truly counters, its own win rate will suffer because of it, right? That's what it means to be oppressive. That's why oppressive decks almost never have the highest win rates. Again, they have high win rates. They have high win rates, but they're always like the most complained about decks, when in reality, they're like the 5th to 10th strongest deck. They're like, they're in the top 10 strong decks, but they're not like, they're disproportionately complained about, which is important because they are fairly complained about. Go Hard is a fair deck to complain about. It does have an unhealthy effect on the metagame. And that is what demands a nerf more so than win rate or power level. But what this means, and this is very, very important, is that when a strategy like this gets nerfed, its win rate doesn't necessarily go down. Its play rate goes down, and that's important. That's very, very important that its play rate goes down. But when a strategy like this gets nerfed, and when its play rate goes down, and when people are playing decks, so again, decks like, Discard Aggro and Ash Nox and Draven Ezreal. Draven Ezreal still sees a lot of play, but it has fallen off because of that. Decks like that have between like a 30 and it's like a 30% win rate against Go Hard. It's really bad. It's really bad. And now that there's less Go Hard in the ladder, we will see more of those other decks. So, when you count up the situations where the 5 mana pack your bags matters for the win, and, this is kind of my own personal interpretation. I might be wrong about this, but it's a notable amount, but it's not the biggest deal ever, right? If were the 1 mana pack your bags was necessary for the win, let's say this happens in 5% of games. Let's say this happens in 5% of games, where like you would not have won the game without it being a 1 mana pack your bags. You could argue it's 8%, you could argue it's 3%, you could argue it's as high as 10%. Let's say it's 5%. I think 5% is pretty fair. It doesn't matter. Normally, this nerf would be a huge deal because normally you're looking at, okay, wow. So this 5% sounds like a small number, right? But that's 5% effective net win rate because you have this situation where, man, this like in 5% of your ladder games, this will literally be the difference between winning and losing. And 5% net win rate is the difference between having a 57% win rate and a 52% win rate. For those of you guys who don't know, 52 and 57% win rate is the difference between a tier 1 and a tier 3 deck. It also is the difference between a metric fuck ton of climbing speed. For a 57% win rate is going to climb 350% of the speed of a 52% win rate. The difference between that's a huge difference. When we're talking about like effective games to get to masters, a 52% win rate deck will take like 1,200 games from gold to masters, and a 57% win rate deck will take like about like 400 or something. So that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. Look at this, 5%, gigantic. The only problem with that is we have to think about the fact that we have to weigh this with the fact that there's a lot more food on the ladder, and that's an important thing to weigh. Like, yes, this is huge. I'm not saying that this isn't huge. 5% net win rate is gigantic. That is huge. That's normally like one of the biggest nerfs you could do to a deck. But in a case like TF Go Hard, you have to understand its win rate is not that high right now. TF Go Hard's win rate right now on ladder is like 53, 54%, depending on like, it's around 54%. Which is right like on the verge of tier 2 and tier 1. And the reason it's not got that high of a win rate is because it is countering things too efficiently. And people stop playing those things, and suddenly it's a solid deck, but it doesn't have as much food on ladder. When its play rate goes down, like play rate and win rate have an inverse function, right? When its play rate goes down, its win rate goes up. And when its play rate goes down because of a nerf, its win rate will also go down because of the nerf. But the fact that its win rate goes up and down at the same time means that there's a balancing factor. And its win rate might change more than I expect, but there's a very important thing going on here. And I think a lot of people aren't really giving credit to that. So you think about like all the decks being run on ladder, like even if there's just a bit more people running like decks that get really countered by Go Hard, that will have a really big positive impact on Go Hard's net win rate that could counter this this negative net win rate, right? If that makes sense. And by the way, we've seen this happen before. We have seen decks like this is a common thing in card games. Not super common. It happens once every couple of patches, major nerfs. It's very possible for nerfed things to have a higher win rate because they got nerfed. That happens a good amount. It's not like it's not the average, it's not the norm, but that's not uncommon to see. It sounds really counterintuitive. I like to compare it to like you can think of it like a virus that burns through its population too fast, right? Like when a virus is kind of too effective, it burns itself out and loses efficacy. And it does that by killing people, and viruses aren't designed to
today.
kill people, but sometimes they accidentally
I love
do.
to go hard
And this is the same thing that happens with decks that are quote unquote oppressive, which is that they burn through their population too fast. Like, they have these host decks, which are decks that they really counter, and because they counter them too hard, because they're too effective at doing what they do, they burn through their effective population and they lose points because of it, right? Like, it's the same exact thing happening from like an ecosystem, I guess, perspective. If you consider, usually when you think ecosystem, you don't think virus, but it's the same logic, at least. It's the problem of specialist predators versus generalists. Yes, exactly. Specialist predators versus generalists, if you actually want ecosystem. That's a good way of putting it. I forgot about those words because I haven't been in school for many, many years. I'm not trying to be a downer. Go Hard got nerfed, and it got nerfed a notable amount. Go Hard was an oppressive deck, and its play rate will see a large drop because of the nerf. These are all true things. The thing to understand about nerfing and buffing and balance is that your job as a dev is play rate first and win rate second. And the reason win rate is important is because it functions into play rate. That's the thing to understand. So, like, I'm not saying that this nerf is going to be ineffective, and I'm not saying that it was a mistake to nerf it like this. I'm not saying that the ladder won't be in some ways cured because of this. These are all true things. These are all true things. But what I'm saying is this is a completely separate fact from claiming that Go Hard is going to have a low win rate, right? That is it. People are kind of conflating win rate with play rate in terms of how it actually fits into this. And again, I'd like to clarify, I could be wrong in my, like, I personally believe that it's not going to change much. It's very possible it'll change a lot more than I think. You know, maybe it will go down to being a tier 3 deck. Again, it's arguably already tier 2 in some ways, but yeah, maybe it'll go down a bit. Again, now when we understand it all with this context, we can go back to like this sort of thing and really think about what this means. Again, this comment is correct in pretty much every way, but it's just like, first of all, 15% isn't that bad. When you look at like how a lot of card game metas do go, yeah, like this guy's saying, like, there's a lot of card game metas that are much worse. 15% is a reasonable range. I don't have a problem with 15%. There's some people that would, and it's fine. Like, in terms of the most hated thing, the problem is that people don't hate things because of their play rate. Their play rate's a factor. People hate things because they are unfun or they are oppressive. Those are kind of like the two biggest reasons. And those are the reasons why we nerf things, right? Oppressive, like, when people are complaining that it's oppressive, some of them, I guess, are not really saying the right things, but what I presume what they mean is that it's, you know, stopping them from playing things that they want. It's stopping a high amount of ladder diversity. What people, it's not really necessarily just like, oh, it's effective play rate. Although there were a couple of weeks there, like after the patch launched, where it had a much higher play rate than this, and that was at the point where play rate directly becomes an issue, because when you queue into it like every game, that becomes very frustrating. That's all I wanted to say about it. I felt like I needed to, just because I've seen a lot of people sort of not really look at it as such a dynamic thing.